Hello everybody, and welcome back to Cam Critiques. Miitopia was initially released on 3DS after the launch of the Switch in most regions, to middling reviews. As a result, I, like many others, skipped this game. However, unlike other games from this time period, like Mario Sports Superstars, Miitopia gained a somewhat dedicated fanbase. Was that deserved? Is Miitopia a hidden cult classic that deserved to be remade for Switch? Or should it have been left to die on old hardware? Let's discuss this by first talking about the gameplay of Miitopia. The gameplay is clearly not the primary focus of Miitopia, but it's featured much more prominently than Tomodachi Life, its predecessor. Miitopia is a combination of a comedy life sim, like Tomodachi Life, where you cast your friends as different characters and see how they interact, and an RPG. There are stats to build, relationships to develop, levels to gain, and lots of monsters to fight. But sadly, none of it feels fleshed out enough to be satisfying. To build stats, you feed food to your party members. This food is obtained in the levels of the game, where you automatically run through an area in a mostly straight line and fight monsters, or through mini-games that you can play with tickets gained from said levels. Sometimes you'll also get letters from old characters with food attached as a gift. After each level, your party stops at an inn, and here the bulk of the character building is done. At this inn, you can select an option to feed your party members. They'll get different amounts of stat increases depending on whether or not they like the food, which is decided completely randomly as far as I can tell. You can only feed each party member a limited amount at each inn visit before they get full. This is a pretty basic system, but it is really cumbersome and slow. There is an animation you must watch for every piece of food a character eats, and a dialogue box describing their reaction afterwards, even if they've eaten it already and their opinion is already known. And you also have to select food one piece at a time. You can't keep a stack of the same food in your hands and give different servings to different party members quickly. In a vacuum, none of this stuff is too time consuming, but there are hundreds of levels, and thus hundreds of inn visits, and thus hundreds of wasted seconds watching the same animations and reading the same dialogue again and again. I think you'll come to find this obnoxious repetition is a common theme throughout pretty much all of Miitopia, honestly. Relationship building isn't much better. You can build relationships in a wide variety of ways in Miitopia. Sometimes they'll randomly build during enemy encounters or level traversal. They'll build between Miis that room together at the aforementioned inn visits. You can also use special tickets gotten from levels or minigames to send two of your Miis on outings where they'll build lots of relationship points. This system has a huge problem. There is not nearly enough dialogue for it. You'll have to waste full minutes on outings to see characters say the exact same thing they said before, time and time again. As relationships build in the inn, or fights break out, or discussions happen on the field, you'll see the same dialogue repeated there a lot too. The illusion that these Miis have any real personality or charm is absolutely shattered when two totally different characters say the same thing as another pair did 5 minutes ago, word for word, or when a single pair repeats their conversations again and again. I saw maybe half an hour of unique conversations between my party members in Miitopia, and I spent more than 2 hours watching my party members have conversations. It just gets so tiring, it's really repetitive. Building relationships gives you important skills for battle too, so it's not something you can just ignore, but at least the leveling system is significantly better. As you gain experience from battles, you gain unique skills for each class. You select the class when you make a party member. Thankfully there are enough classes for each party member to have a different one. And progression is pretty fast. You're always getting cool new skills to use for most of the game. Sadly, there's still a problem here too. They reset your level to 1, multiple times. Every time you feel like you're about to unlock some skill that's really cool, you start over with a brand new class. I didn't get past level 12 into the last quarter of the game. And this is where I found out why they reset your levels. You don't unlock any interesting skills past those first few levels. Progression feels so fast because it's so limited. Ultimately, in a way, this is just another area of Miitopia where you're doing the same type of thing with very minor changes again and again. But at least there are some differences present here, which I can't really say about most of the other parts of this game. Battles are definitely the most gamey thing in Miitopia, but this game still seems to go out of its way to make you as uninvolved as possible. You control, at most, one character. Every other party member is AI controlled, and you can even have your character be AI controlled. You get more influence over battles as you unlock sprinkles that let you heal, revive, or buff any character from the pause menu. But it's never much, and real strategy is never really needed because the game is so easy. Enemy encounters offer little variety, as the skills different enemies use have little variety too. Enemies pretty much all just use variations of normal attacks. Sometimes you're hit with a debuff, but you just move that character to the safe spot from the pause menu, and it'll heal anything. Again, you don't walk around yourself, the game walks forward for you. You gain money from battles that you can spend on new gear, but you don't get to choose the gear you buy. The character suggests it at the inn, and you give them the money. And they don't even always buy what they say they will. Sometimes they'll come back with a basic recovery item instead. This game literally has an option to pretty much entirely play itself. And no matter what, it's always playing at least the majority of itself. Now, sometimes you do get to walk around the town and talk to different people, but these towns are always just one short, straight line. Sometimes you get to play one of the two mini-games, but they both just involve pressing a single button and getting your reward selected by total chance. The Switch release adds a new horse character, but it's basically just another party member with even more limited dialogue and actions. Everything in this game is just so bare bones and repetitive. There is pretty much no gameplay to engage with. Maybe its systems would hold up in a short eShop game that was 5 hours or less, where you wouldn't have to repeat all these actions so many times. But it doesn't work at all for an RPG where you visit hundreds of levels, vanquish over 1,000 enemies, and play for over 20 hours. However, there is one aspect of Miitopia that is truly great. The character creator is incredible. It is so detailed. You can add so much more to a Mii than I ever would have imagined. Even someone with little artistic skill like me was able to slap together a Mii of Alex from Y2K, a postmodern RPG, that's more accurate than I thought a Mii could ever get. Or something that doesn't even resemble a Mii anymore, like this big Chungus character I made, with relative ease. And people that are more artistically talented have done absolutely insane things. I mean, just look at some of the stuff at Mitsumi Mario on Twitter was able to make. I really hope there's a Tomodachi Life sequel, or something else that's better than Miitopia that could use this character creator in the works, because it'd be a tragedy to keep it locked in this overpriced, overlong mess of an RPG. I give the gameplay of Miitopia a 3 out of 10. Now, let's talk about the story and characters of Miitopia. This section is a bit difficult to write. Usually this would be a pretty long section in an RPG review, but there isn't really a big story in Miitopia, nor is there even a set of defined characters. The whole idea is that you set each different character to be a Mii of your choice. But I'll get into the problems with that later. First I'll talk about the overarching narrative. Miitopia tells a story of you, the hero, fighting against an evil dark lord that is stealing the faces of all who live in the game's world. This is incredibly generic and unbelievably shallow. There are a couple of very predictable twists, but that description really tells you pretty much everything there is in this game regarding story. Again, the major focus of this game is clearly on the interactions between different characters played by your friends, so I can kind of see why they didn't write a complex narrative or anything like that. But if the gameplay is shallow, and the story is shallow, why is this an RPG at all? Why didn't they just make Tomodachi Life 2, or 3 depending if you count the Japanese-only DS release as the first, where they could have provided context that allowed for more fleshed out, charming Mii relationships? Overall, the story in this game is very shallow and lackluster, and I struggle to look past it, considering that the gameplay is also shallow and lackluster. Now, the characters in this game are really up to you. At least, that's what the game wants you to think. Of course, this isn't totally accurate. You'll encounter villagers, fairies, adventurers, and the like that you get to pick a face for among your Miis. However, they all have the same dialogue regardless of your choice, and the dialogue is all fairly generic, so it can work with pretty much anybody. That's right, the gameplay is basic, the overall narrative is basic, and the individual dialogue is basic. So where is the appeal of this game? Well, I did say it was a comedy RPG at the beginning of this review. This game's main goal seems to be to create funny and charming interactions between characters that you set to be whoever you want. Playing this game is more like playing through a play of an adventure story than playing through an adventure, where the main draw is the dialogue and the actors. Sadly, the humor falls massively short too. It gets really repetitive, really fast. It was mildly entertaining to see my friend is the son of Peter Griffin, or Alex from Y2K is my own best friend, for the first few hours. But the jokes rarely go beyond those kind of mildly humorous situations that you have to set up yourself. And when they do, they're actually worse. Every actual joke from this game that I can remember is either random nonsense or literal potty humor. Ultimately, the story and characters in Miitopia massively fall short. None of it is given much time or attention, and what's there is honestly off-putting more often than not. I was mildly entertained by a few things at first, but those things got old really quick. This is another reason why I believe this game really should have been a short eShop title, and not a full-length RPG that's longer than the latest mainline Final Fantasy game. I give the story and characters of Miitopia a 2 out of 10. Now let's look at Miitopia's visuals and sound. Seeing as this is a re-release of a mostly forgotten 3DS game, I didn't expect much here. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. Miitopia on Switch isn't just a port, but it seems to be a full remake of the 3DS title. Just look at the differences between these environments. It doesn't have a very unique art style or anything, but it looks consistently good and very polished. The soundtrack is also surprisingly alright. It's got a pretty good amount of variety and solid sounding tracks. It isn't mind-blowing, there isn't stuff that'll get stuck in your head or anything, but it's never obnoxious. There is one big issue though. This 3DS re-release somehow has performance problems. During lots of cutscenes, there is bizarre slowdown that is really distracting. It's not a huge deal or anything, but it's worth pointing out, and it's pretty confusing. There's really not too much else to say here. I wish they remade another better 3DS game instead, but the work they did remaking this one is pretty good. It's nothing exceptional, but I don't have any complaints. If you told me this was always a Switch game, I'd probably believe you. I give the visuals and sound of Miitopia an 8 out of 10. In conclusion, Miitopia is nothing special. Everything in this game feels half-baked. I don't think I've ever played a game this repetitive. There is about an hour's worth of original content here, and even while holding down the button that speeds up the game the entire time, I must again reiterate that this game took me over 20 hours to complete. The combat is boring, repetitive, and basic. The story is boring, repetitive, and basic. The character dialogue is boring, repetitive, and basic. The character building is boring, repetitive, and basic. Pretty much the entire game is boring, repetitive, and basic. The Mii creator is truly great, but it's not worth buying the game for when all you can do with your creations is use them in a bad RPG. The visuals and sound are perfectly fine, but that doesn't earn too many points here when they themselves aren't exceptional and the rest of the game is so underwhelming. Overall, I give Miitopia a 4 out of 10. I just can't recommend this title to anybody. Thank you guys for watching this video, I really appreciate it. If you liked it, I'd also really appreciate it if you liked, commented, hit the notification bell, and or subscribed. I'd also recommend you check out some of my other content, like my video on why I believe the Wii U is better than the Nintendo Switch, or my ranking of almost every single first-party Nintendo Switch game. If you want to see additional updates about the channel, follow me on Twitter or Instagram, or join my Discord server, all link in the description below. Thank you all for watching, have a great rest of your day.